In that world of gangsters and quiet deals, little Carmine Lupertazzi is one of the strangest figures you can find. On paper, he should be terrifying. He is the son of a powerful New York boss. He has money, connections, and a crew willing to back him. Yet most of the time, when people talk about him, you hear laughter, jokes, and frustration more than fear. The way other characters see little Carmine is a mix of mockery, annoyance, and, strangely, a kind of grudging respect by the end. If you follow their reactions closely, you start to see that little Carmine is less about who he is and more about what everyone projects onto him: lost potential, a danger wrapped in stupidity, and finally the example of someone who chooses survival over pride. From the start, other people never really look at little Carmine as his own man. They see his father first. Carmine Sr. was one of those old school bosses who had style, patience, and real power. Little Carmine walks into rooms already carrying that weight, and everyone knows it. To a lot of people, he looks like a pampered prince who doesn't have to earn anything. The Florida lifestyle, the tanning, the boat, the film projects, all of that feeds into this image. New York guys roll their eyes at him. To them, he's the soft son who spends most of his time in the sunshine instead of in social clubs and sit-downs. So before he even opens his mouth, the basic picture others have is, he's the boss's kid, but he's not built like the father. Then he starts talking, and that makes it worse. Little Carmine is famous for his strange choice of words. He twists phrases, mixes up big terms, and tries to sound smarter than he really is. Every time he does that, you can see how people look at him. They don't say it to his face, but behind his back they talk about him as if he's slow, as if he's out of his depth. His own crew sometimes just stares at him when he throws out another wrong expression. For them, he's this rich, somewhat harmless guy who is trying very hard to play big thinker. That hurts his image more than anything. A killer can be respected. A quiet guy who keeps his head down can be respected. But a man who looks like he wants to sound like a philosopher and fails, that invites jokes. Johnny Sack especially sees him this way. Johnny is one of the sharpest men in New York. He's serious, proud, constantly thinking about respect and power. When he looks at little Carmine, he doesn't just see a rival, he sees a clown standing in the way of his own rise. Johnny thinks Carmine is weak, indecisive, and unserious, and he says this more than once. To Johnny, every move little Carmine makes is proof that he doesn't understand what this life demands. When little Carmine hesitates during the power struggle after his father dies, Johnny reads that as cowardice. When Carmine stays in Florida instead of staying in New York to push his claim, Johnny sees that as a man who wants the title but not the responsibility. So in Johnny's head, little Carmine is basically the spoiled son who thinks he can inherit the throne without having any of the qualities of a ruler. The old school New York guys around Johnny feel something similar, but with more anger and less patience. To them, the idea that little Carmine could become boss is almost insulting. A man like Phil Leotardo, who spent years in prison and lived through the roughest days of the life, sees Carmine as soft, fake, and out of touch. Phil values toughness, discipline, and clear strength. When he looks at little Carmine, he sees spray tan, a boat, and half-remembered leadership speeches. That is not the image of a man who commands soldiers. Phil's contempt shows in his tone, in his jokes, and in how little faith he has in Carmine as a serious opponent. Yet not everyone who backs little Carmine actually believes he is strong. Rusty Milio and Angelo Garape support him during the power struggle, but the way they treat him tells you a lot. To them, Carmine is more of a flag than a leader. He's a name they can rally behind, a symbol of the old man's line against Johnny Sack and his hunger for power. They see little Carmine as someone they can use, not necessarily someone they trust to guide them. In private, they know he's not ruthless enough, not focused enough, and not sharp enough. But he is useful. If he becomes boss, they might pull the strings from behind the scenes. So in their minds, he is a potential puppet king, someone with the right last name but not the right brain. Even among people who are scared of Johnny, backing little Carmine feels like a risky bet. Lorraine Caluzzo and her side see him as the only real alternative to Johnny's control, but you can tell they're not exactly full of confidence. They talk about him in a way that mixes hope and doubt. He is their chance at protecting themselves from Johnny, but they know he's not a natural commander. They're betting that the name Lupertazzi is enough to scare people and hold the family together. Deep down, though, they sense what Johnny senses, that Carmine's heart is not fully in it. So even his own political side doesn't view him as a powerful man, they view him as a door out of Johnny's rule. On the New Jersey side of things, little Carmine is mostly seen through a mix of humor and caution. Tony Soprano hears about him long before he deals with him face to face. Tony knows the father, respects Carmine Sr., and he understands that even a soft son can be dangerous because of the people around him. When Tony finally spends more time with little Carmine, he can't help but be amused. The malapropisms, the fake deep lines, the Florida attitude, it all makes Tony see him as a guy who isn't fully serious. But Tony also looks at him more kindly than the New York guys do. In some scenes, you can tell Tony almost likes little Carmine. He finds him harmless, almost sweet, compared to the usual angry, bitter men he deals with. At the same time, Tony never forgets that this harmless guy holds a lot of power by accident. He's still the son of Carmine Sr., and people will always show up if he calls. So Tony keeps a certain respect for the position, if not for the man himself. When little Carmine tries to talk peace or offer advice, Tony listens just enough to see if there's anything useful, or if he can steer things to his own advantage. For Tony, little Carmine is not someone to fear, but also not someone to ignore. He's a factor, a piece on the board that other people might rally around. Silvio has a more cold, tactical view. As the main advisor, he looks at people mostly in terms of what they bring to the table. When he talks about little Carmine, you can hear the sense that this is a man with a strong brand but a weak engine. Silvio knows that Carmine's name can still bring peace or start war. He also knows that the man behind the name hesitates, gets confused, and changes direction when things get too hot. That makes Silvio see him as unreliable. You can't build a long-term plan around someone like that. At best, he's a short-term tool. Silvio recognizes the political value, but his respect doesn't go much further than that. The younger guys in Jersey, like Christopher, tend to treat little Carmine as comedy. They notice the way he talks, the weird sentences, the forced wise man energy. To them, he's almost like a character from a cheap movie, pretending to be deep. Chris is the type who watches people closely, and you get the sense that he never sees Carmine as a real force. Instead, he sees him as another one of those made guys who ended up in the right place because of an accident of birth. That doesn't mean Chris forgets Carmine's connections. He still respects the fact that people can die over the man's name, but he doesn't treat him with the same inner fear that he might have for, say, Johnny Phil, or even Tony himself. What's interesting is how the perception of little Carmine changes as the war in New York gets worse. At first, people see his weakness as a joke, but as bodies start dropping, Lorraine, Angelo, others, some people start to realize that his weakness also drives the violence. By refusing to fully stand up and take control, he leaves a power vacuum. Johnny fights to fill it. Rusty fights to keep the old line. Phil pushes his own vision of strength, and in the middle is this unsure son who keeps coming and going from Florida. The war is, in a twisted way, caused by the fact that the man with the right last name is not really that interested in ruling. For some characters, this just doubles down their hatred. Johnny sees each retreat of little Carmine as another sign of his cowardice. Every time Carmine backs off, Johnny feels more justified in calling him an idiot, in treating him as an obstacle rather than a rival. Phil, too, uses Carmine's indecision as proof that the new generation is weak and that real men like him have to bring order back. In their minds, little Carmine is the symbol of everything gone soft and confused in the modern mob. He wants the comforts, the nice life, the image, but he does not want to live and die by the code like they did. But there is another side that slowly appears, especially in the way Tony and even some New York people start to talk about him. When little Carmine finally steps away from the fight and decides not to chase the top spot anymore, a few characters start to see him in a different light. Yes, they still think he's not sharp. Yes, they still laugh at his speeches. But they also recognize that he made a choice almost nobody in that world makes. He chose to walk away from the crown and live. He decided that no amount of pride or legacy was worth the constant risk of getting blown up in a car or shot leaving his house. To men who pride themselves on never backing down, this looks like weakness. But to anyone who spends time thinking about the cost of this life, and Tony sometimes does, it also looks like a kind of strange wisdom. Tony himself, at different moments, talks about how this business just ends in death or prison. Yet he stays. He keeps going. He cannot let go. Little Carmine actually does let go. So a few people, quietly, start to see him less as a clown and more as someone who knew his limits. There's also the simple fact that when he bows out, the violence calms down. This is important. While Carmine was still in the race, his name gave courage to the side that backed him, and that meant more blood. When he steps aside, it opens the door to deals, to stability, to everyone going back to making money. Some characters notice this. They may not say, he saved lives, but they understand that by admitting he wasn't the man for the job, he removed one major reason for people to keep killing each other. So the man people once saw as a joke quietly becomes one of the reasons things settle. Of course, that doesn't erase the early image. If you asked most people in that world to sum up little Carmine, words like idiot, lightweight, or soft would be the first to come up. He never earns the fear and hard respect that come with real leadership. You don't see people lower their eyes when he walks in the room the way they do with some other bosses. You don't see soldiers talk about him as a man who did what needed to be done. Instead, they remember the boat, the tan, the vacation homes, and the speeches that made no sense. Still, buried under all that mockery is something else. A sense that, in his own way, he got out with his skin, and that nagging thought bothered some of them. Because if the idiot son of the boss could step away and still live a rich and safe life, what does that say about the men who stayed? It holds up a mirror, and many of them do not want to look into it. It's easier to keep calling him stupid than to admit he might have made the smarter choice. In the end, little Carmine exists in the minds of others as a walking contradiction. To New York hardliners, he's a disgrace to his father's name, a spoiled child who wanted power only as long as it came with comfort and applause. To the schemers like Rusty and Angelo, he was a useful banner, a tool with a famous surname who never truly controlled his own moves. To the New Jersey crew, he is a half-serious, half-funny figure, someone you can laugh at, do business with, and never fully trust to take charge. And to a few quieter observers, he is also the man who showed that there might actually be another path besides dying for the throne. That is what makes little Carmine such an interesting figure when you look at how other people think of him. He never becomes the great boss his last name might have promised. Instead, he becomes a kind of joke that still has power, a soft man who is still at the center of a violent storm, a leader that nobody truly respects, yet whose decision to walk away helps close one of the bloodiest chapters in that world. In a place where almost everyone is destroyed by pride, revenge, or the need to prove themselves, little Carmine is the rare man who lets everyone keep laughing at him if it means he gets to live another day. And no matter how much they mock him, somewhere deep inside, many of them know that they would never be brave enough to do the same.